Hi, my name's Ian Wallace. I call myself the Messed Up Counsellor, which is quite an intriguing name. And the podcast you're about to see is one of many, and we've been doing about a year now. So you can look back and see all the things we've talked about with guests and on my own over the process. A lot of the information I use in the podcast initially came from the first book I wrote in 2011. Why do we do that? What do we do about it? And that came out and was the basis of all my learning, understanding at that time, which is going back a few years now. And that process of understanding how the world works for people, how we can alter, change, and adapt it, was kind of what it was there to do with the initial stages. I've made that now an audiobook as well, so it's available on Amazon as an audio file that you can check out and you can download to your heart's content, and hopefully that will be helpful. In the podcasts, we're trying to look at all sorts of things about human interactions, human dynamics, the world, and how we might understand it more or change it more. So it gives you lots of ideas and tools in order to think about and look at different ways of being or dealing with things. And hopefully that brings people together and makes people more able to connect and communicate. Lots of topics. If you ever want to connect to me, just obviously drop me a comment on the podcast and I shall try as much as possible to reply. And if you've got any ideas of things that we might want to use on the podcasts, then please let me know. My name's Ian Wallace. Thanks for looking and thanks for listening. Hi, and welcome to another weekly podcast from Ian Wallace. Today, what I'd like to look at is kind of when situations in our world and our life means that the person that we're in a relationship with, whether or not that's a partner, whether that's a family member, whoever, they then become ill or their life changes dramatically. When I'm working in the room with these kind of dynamics and situations, it's never easy because the person or people in front of me started their time together, their life together, their relationship together in a different way. They had no expectations it was going to end up this way. So whether the person that they're connected to has had an accident or there's some kind of health issue, maybe they've had a stroke or any kind of situation where they're not able to be and look after themselves in the way they used to, really. Because when we start relationships, we have things that we would like to happen, expectations of where this relationship is going. And if the relationship becomes committed and connected and, we live together or we get married or we have kids or whatever connector that becomes closer, then our expectations, quite naturally, will be where this relationship is going, what we'd like to happen. Now, unfortunately, life sometimes just takes it and totally turns it upside down. So if somebody had a car accident, for example, or had a stroke, that is something that neither person is in control of, obviously. And the relationship you had at that point will change. It will become more a process of a carer, in sense, to somebody who is cared for. And that's an amazingly difficult thing to work with and to kind of deal with, because this is not the way it should have been. This is not the expectation I had. And when I find people in the counselling therapy rooms going through these processes, then they are always filled with the feelings and emotions they're having, that this is not the relationship I signed up for, in a sense. But also then the guilt of even having those feelings and emotions, because this person in front of me is a person I cared about, I loved, I was committed to. So this confusion of feelings and emotions is not uncommon. And it is unfortunately normal. So the aspect of my work is to try and get them to realise that this is normal and it's understandable. There is a reason for it. Now that health situation, accident process might mean that the person never gets back to the person they used to be. And that's going to be hard to take on board. It's going to be hard to realise and understand and to work with, to be fair. So whether I'm working with the individual that's been affected by this as their partner, their person they're connected to, or the person who has been affected by some major health or life change situation, trying to get them to, in a sense, give themselves a break, and understand that the kind of feelings and emotions that they're going through is normal, natural, and understandable. And it isn't because they're a bad person thinking these things, looking at these things, talking about these things. And that process in itself can be really helpful. We normally, most of us, internalise those kind of feelings and think it's just us. Which is why reaching out to support groups and things is a healthy thing to do, because then we can see other people going through pretty much the same kind of feelings, emotions and situations. So it kind of normalises it for us in a sense. I'm not saying the situation is normal. I'm just saying the reaction to that life-changing event is normal. And trying to get them to see that is a major part of initially the work in these situations. And for some people, that's really hard. Some people, it's not so hard. Everybody's different. If we can help them to understand that and come to terms with that and say, well, actually, you're not a bad person for thinking this way, then that'll help to release some of those processes. It'll also help to cement this new, different relationship that you're having with this person or persons. And it'll help to find a way to combat that, find a way to get through that. When I'm working with people who have had these situations happen, then it's really hard sometimes to get them to think about themselves, think about what their needs are, because again, that guilt thing comes in. In order for them to function better for the people they're looking after or supporting, they need to be able to be feeling relaxed, feeling enjoying life, having pleasure, having fun. They need to recharge their batteries. If they don't, then they're actually not helping themselves, obviously, but they're actually not helping the person they're caring for. And that's how it's helpful to put it across. This is benefiting not only you, but the person you're looking after or supporting. This respite aspect where they get a break, they get away, they kind of do things for themselves to recharge their batteries. Now that isn't easy. Well, two reasons really. One is that there's very little help and support with respite, as people find out. And the second is this feeling that I shouldn't be thinking about me because this person's gone through some major traumatic process in their world and life that they're not in charge of and not connected to. So trying to have or open up those kind of conversations is helpful. I'm not saying where the end of that conversation goes, because that's an individual thing, but just having that conversation and opening up that dialogue in a non-blaming way, non-judging way, is helpful for either party, to be fair. Because the person who has been affected by this major change in life, they also will have those similar feelings sometimes of guilt. I'm stopping you having a life. This is something I have to deal with on my own. I shouldn't be putting pressure on you. This is not something you signed up for. So the feelings can be both ways, very similar, in different ways similar, but they can be very similar thoughts, ideas of the process. And I should imagine the person that is being cared for or looked after or supported, one of their fears will be, well, are you going to leave me? Are you going to leave me to whoever? Because this is too hard for you. Or I might push you away to leave me in order to have that thought processes of, well, this is not your life, and so I'm releasing you to have a life because I'm stopping you having that life. All these things happen in our heads, and the ideas, the thoughts are not unusual and not uncommon, as I've said. And there may be even more that you can think of. I'm not exhaustive on what I'm putting across. If we can work with those ideas, those thoughts externally by talking, by sharing, if we can't share with the person we are supporting or looking after, then certainly sharing it with somebody else, which is why support groups are a good idea, as I've said. Then we can actually start to take apart this emotional reaction and start looking on what can we do, what is available to us, how can we work this world with different expectations, possibly, more normally, and different ways of being. And that helps us to engage with a much more productive way, because we can work with the person instead of taking charge of the person. Now, there might be things we do need to take charge of. If they can't drive anymore, then we may need to drive, or we need to pass a test to drive to get them from A to B and such like. So it might be that they can't do things that they used to do, and we do have to support that. We do have to kind of give that a different process. So in some senses, we do need to make decisions for them in their best interests. And again, that can be really hard to come to terms with, because that process of recording their world and their life in detail sometimes is never easy. And in that process of helping them, sometimes it's helping them when they can't give us that input. They can't make us aware of what their needs might or might not be, depending on the severity of the traumatic event. And moving through that, working with that, we can at least share those concerns, share those ideas, share those thoughts. We're not on our own. Because sometimes, from what people tell me, it very much feels like we are. It very much feels like we can't rely on other people. Now, initially, maybe people came to your rescue, and but then as time goes on, as life happens, as things settle down, if you like, from the emotional disturbance, then people sometimes do back off. They do get on with their world and their life, and they do sometimes not necessarily register that you need that help, or maybe you're telling them you don't need help, so they just assume everything's okay. So this talking, sharing, being part of something that is an understanding of your situation, your position, can be really, really helpful. Not easy to engage with sometimes, people tell me. They're very resistant sometimes to connect with groups or organisations. And sometimes they tell me that's because it would make it real. It would make the situation real by talking to other people and even talking to therapists. They kind of resist doing that sometimes. But getting it out there, helping to have valuing conversations where we're not judged, we're not told we're bad people for having these thoughts, ideas, can be really helpful. It is going to create something completely different in your relationship with the other person. And that's unfortunate, and sometimes that's never going to change. Sometimes it can change to a certain extent. They can become more able to manage on their own, for example, or able to get around on their own. But sometimes not. And that process is not an easy one to navigate and to journey through. So getting support, getting help, being able to talk to somebody is a big, big thing to do to get over that hurdle, to take control of that, if you like, to kind of make it a piece of your world, the reality. It usually is the best thing to do, though. And in that process of getting support, getting help, having that external voice, listener, sympathizer, if you like, can be the difference between coping and not coping. So if you find yourself in this situation and you find yourself having those thoughts, ideas, and you find yourself blaming yourself for having them, please don't. Please don't. Because that is unfortunately what is occurring. You're just trying to make sense of this massive impact in your world and life and their world and their life. So whether you're the person who's looking after or you're a person that's gone through this traumatic event, whatever it might be, and that's different for everybody, obviously, trauma, then please reach out, please talk, please share. And this podcast, help to spread those kind of conversations, because they're the conversations that we should have, because it will make it easier for everybody. It will not change the situation, no. It can't, unfortunately. But it might change or help the interactive, reactive process, the communication, externalizing the feelings and emotions might help it become more easier to cope with and to share. Hopefully that made sense. Hopefully it was interesting for you. If you've got any other interesting topics you'd like me to cover in human dynamics and interactions, please let me know. You can get me through the comment sections on the podcast, and you can email the Counselling Wakefield email address. Enjoy, like your life, and if you are going through something like this, please give yourself a break. Show yourself some love. My name's Ian Wallace. Take care. Hi, thanks for listening to the podcast, and hopefully it made sense and was interesting for you. Please subscribe, like and share. With the podcasts, you never know who will be helped by the things we talk about, things we share. We don't normally tell people our problems, but by sharing it and helping other people to understand things. The book Insecurity, It's All About Me, is also available now through Amazon, and it gives you an understanding of what drives insecurity, how insecurity works within our human dynamics, and how you can get a much more secure connection with people. It gives you lots of ideas and thoughts, which is really good. So thanks for listening. Subscribe, like, share, hit the button, and if you've got any comments, please give me them, and I'll do my best to answer them. Thanks very much. Take care.